Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us on another Thursday. My name's Dan. We've got Alex, we've got Will, we've got Keith, and together we are most of the Anchore open source engineering team. And so we meet every week in this forum to go through Anchore's open source projects. Three big ones are Syft, Grype, and Grant, and these are a collection of tools that you can use to point at your software, whether you're a open source developer or you've got container images or file systems, you're looking to learn more about what's inside of these things. And one of our tools, Syft, is able to be pointed at, say, a container image and extract a lot of information about what's actually in there, what software is in there, what's it made of, and produce a very detailed document that called an SBOM. And then some of our other tools like Grype and Grant can take that SBOM and do some higher level functions over them, like vulnerability scanning, some deep license inspection, and policy stuff. And so that's generally what our tooling does. And in these sessions, we typically like to go through any open issues, any open PRs that have the needs discussion label on them, and have a chat about them, see what we can do. These issues range from, say, a bug report all the way through to a really thorny, interesting problem that we need to kind of chew on and talk about. So thanks for joining us either live or if you're looking at this later, but I think we'll probably jump right into it. Let's kick on over to our issues view, and these would be issues across all of our open source projects that have needs discussion. Maybe we can start off there. I'll hand it over to the team. Where do you guys want to start?
Well, I think, Will, you added the needs discussion on the Linux kernel module cataloger. I don't know if that one's fresh to the on top of your head or
Um,
not.
Maybe. Can we open it? Did I say anything about why? Sometimes I'm smart and remember that future me is not going to remember everything and leave myself a comment. I'm not sure this was one of those times.
This was not one of those times. This was before
Okay.
coffee, Will. So if we're not ready to talk about this one too, that's fine. I just didn't know. I haven't read it yet.
Okay. And this is Syft 2987. Let me just take a quick look at it.
What have we got?
I will say, I think I've seen in the past that some other people have noted that many of the Linux kernel modules don't have versions in them, and
Right.
it might be a good thing
So,
to note about uh, the compliance features that we have, but it's not directly what this is asking about.
yeah, and there's like two things here. Like one is like, well, what's SIFT able to find? But B, what's actually there? Like my understanding is that like the modules themselves don't actually like a lot of times have a version. Is that what you're saying, Keith? Because that's what I yeah,
Uh,
okay.
Right. I
uh,
think, yeah, that's kind of what I vaguely recall from when I looked into this before.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
so the last comment on here, I think, is what inspired me to add needs discussion, although it was not from me. The person is running sudo mod info on it, and they're getting out some. It looks like Bear Magic. The last thing is a is the version or is version information. And so I was wondering if this could be one of the, because we have a lot of catalogers that aren't guaranteed to return um, uh, version information. And so, but it looks like maybe we are like missing something. Like maybe we could take a look at what mod info is parsing out of that file um, and see if there's something we could do there. Um, it could be that I'm just wrong about that. I'm not super familiar with Linux kernel modules. Um, but yeah,
Well,
that
not
was my thinking. And it also seems like we find unknown sometimes. And we've had a lot of discussions lately about like catalogers having the like skip versus emit unknown versus fail versus try to guess or whatever. And I don't know. So I think the two things I wanted to bring up are, does this last comment with the mod info command mean that we're um, missing information that is on disk in the image we're scanning that we could return as a version? And then second, should this have the compliance flags like the other ones do? I think those are the two things I wanted to bring up.
I guess for the compliance one, like we should already be reporting unknown for this if it was empty. So I'm actually, that's what you're talking about, right? Like why doesn't it say unknown in the Syft output for the compliance, like
No,
version
I think
compliance?
he's saying, like, if you look at the last comment, he's running Syft on an embedded, like he's getting kernel modules reported as unknown, but it looks like he can get a version with the mod info command.
Ooh,
And so
right.
that's
Sorry, what's the compliant? You said something about compliance. I was trying to understand.
so I think there's like thread one is like, do we need to go figure out what mod info is doing and parse that metadata out of these files? And then like thread two is um like does the Linux kernel module cataloger have the same like um version compliance things that the other catalogers do? And maybe it does. I'm just wasn't sure it did, because we had quite a few discussions. Actually, Alex, um while you were out, we had quite a few discussions. Somebody came and requested that the Python cataloger have a fail compliance position, which is a setting where, so the requirements txt can potentially raise a package where we don't know exactly the version. And so we can emit a package with unknown, we can not emit a package, or we can guess. And those
Yeah.
were like, and then they are adding another config position, which is fail. Like fail the build, say we don't, like, you
Yeah.
have underspecified your image, go try again or whatever. Um,
Gotcha.
and so I was wondering, like, one of the things that came out of that discussion is that Syft's catalogers are like inconsistent in um what configs are available for like version finding compliance. The like drop, guess, fail kind of switch isn't wired up exactly the same everywhere. And so I just wanted to start that as like a possible thread here.
Let's start
Um,
that thread. I agree. Because there's kind of two things happening there. One, the any cataloger, regardless of what the cataloger is, if it raises up a package with an empty string as the version, that's when the compliance stuff checks in. So it's like a post cataloger kind of thing. There's a single choke point in the code that handles all that. And that's where it's like it will, drop it, will stub it with unknown, etc. But there's this other thing that you're talking about, which is, well, in some cases we can like do other stuff. And this is like per cataloger concern. So like the requirements.txt catalogers is a special snowflake here where we can guess the version. And that and I think it's what you're talking about. Like that's not available in like other places, in other catalogers, that is.
Well, I think one of the things is like we identified that there was a bug in the Python cataloger where it was always dropping things and that didn't have a version. And
That's
so
bad.
like, yeah, that's like we should fix that one. Like that was one of the conclusions for sure that came out of all of those discussions. I think the thing here though is that it is doing the same behavior because this user says that it's reporting unknown rather than a version string. So I suspect it's all still going through the compliance. And so if they didn't want those versions, they could choose from the configuration to drop the unknown versions. But I think the bigger thing here is really, there's some way that this ver magic is finding a version string.
Right.
And we're not. And I think, Dan, you highlighted on the screen here that, at the very least, it looks to be in the path.
Well, yes, but my understanding of ver magic is kernel modules will have this field in elf headers, right? I'm pretty sure it's in the elf header of the kernel module itself. Because what I think it's used for is when you try to load a kernel module and the module was compiled against a version of the kernel that you're not running, I'm pretty sure that's the field used on on module load to say like, no, don't load this module. It's not compatible with the kernel you're running.
Is that what? So do you think Magic the 519.9? Do you think that's the kernel version this module can load with, or?
Yeah, I think I'm pretty sure. Like, double check me on this, but I'm pretty sure Magic is in the kernel module binary itself in its elf header. It's like, this is the version of the kernel you can load me into. And so in my mind, the question is like, is that the version of the module? I mean, I think it's arguable to say like, yeah.
Yeah, interesting. So like popping off the stack just a little bit because we have two catalogers. We have a kernel cataloger, the other one's the kernel module cataloger. And the kernel module cataloger is what we're talking about right now.
Yeah.
But the kernel cataloger, as a side note, so I think it was Avi. He donated parsing magic for those payloads. And so like for the kernel, we actually do look at the magic value to parse out the version in that case. So I'm actually wondering if this is as simple as using that same contribution. So he has his own library, it's called Magic to do this. And where like the disconnect in my head is that I don't think that has anything to do with specific ELF headers. So for me, I guess I got some research to do. So
yeah, grain of salt what I said. I thought the Magic was in the like an elf header for the module because I was triggering something, but
all this is triggering something for me, but I can't remember. So yeah.
But I'm pretty sure that's what it's used for. Like that I'm fairly confident in. And like if you try to load a module, like the last comment, right? This person was running mod info on an x86 host against a kernel module that was compiled for an ARM kernel, and mod info is still showing, yeah, the kernel module is for an ARM thing. So that's a strong implication that indeed that information is in the kernel module. And if you tried to load that ARM module into your x86 kernel, pretty sure that those are the strings that are used to say like, should I even bother trying to load this module? And the answer is no.
I'm wondering if we have enough test fixtures to like quickly test this. Because I know that we have some tests for like the kernel modules and kernel, but what I don't recall is if we have like packaged up in the cache some actual modules. Let's see. Let me see if I can find that.
I dropped a link that's kind of the area of the code. It looks like we do build an image with real modules in them.
Yeah. So hooray. Okay, cool.
It also looks like this parse kernel, Linux kernel module metadata is expecting to get that vermagic string out. And so maybe there's a bug with the parsing or something along those lines that's preventing that.
Cool. So it sounds like maybe where we're at with this is now like a needs investigation. Like maybe this is a small bug or gap in this cataloger and Syft that could be closed by like being smarter about the files. Is that sort of where we're at?
I think so. Just
Okay.
quick question. I didn't open this issue up myself here, but is there a specific test case in here that was referenced? Like, this image should have this thing. It would be great to have. I mean, we can always make them, but I always like a test case to be attached to an image or to an issue. Let's see. This is 20.
Hmm.
Scan Syft with a limb.
So I'm just sharing, yeah, just a little quick readelf on a kernel module that I've got on my system here.
There it is.
There it is.
Info.
I find this to be also very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, then maybe that's the version.
Well, okay, so like,
Yeah.
I mean, okay, I'll ask the dumb question. Is Vermagic really talking about the kernel, like kernel version 5.14, and then version is the version of the module?
Probably,
Mm.
like, because again, I think Vermagic is the one where it's like, this is the kernel that the module is built against.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But, you know,
So
yeah, this might not always be present. I have no idea. Yeah.
can we do a quick Syft experiment? Can we scan like that file or its directory or something and see if Syft finds any version for that?
Oh, look at that.
Okay. So it
Oh,
sounds like
Interesting. So maybe if it doesn't have a version, like it wouldn't surprise me if not every kernel module has a version.
yeah.
So there might be a little bit of a, like, people are seeing Vermagic and thinking,
Yeah.
you know, maybe that should be its version. There's a decision to be made here. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Like
Does
that
does
actually might be
mod
wrong.
If we look down a little bit in the metadata here in this record, yeah, we actually the version magic. So we are reading that. That's what the Vermagic,
Yeah.
like we are reading that in the
yeah.
code, and we are
Okay.
returning.
Yeah. So I wonder if like does mod info, do you have a mod info utility on that system and you can check what mod info says about that module?
Let's see.
I mean, it would not shock me if mod info is readelf. Okay, and that finds a version. So my guess is that this person has a kernel module where because they put their mod info output and there's no version.
Right.
And so Syft says the version is unknown. And I think since the ver magic is like the magic string that tells you what kernel you can be used with, that's not really the version of the package, right? Because like every version of this kernel module that can be compiled for your kernel is going to have the
Yeah.
same ver magic.
Yep.
So it's not really a package version.
I think that's also my latest theory is that, like, you know, there's a bit of a red herring looking at Vermagic when in actuality we should be looking at version, which we already are.
Right.
So
I think it's maybe worth replying and saying, hey, mod info on some kernel modules actually returns a version, not just Vermagic. And in those cases, Syft returns the version. I don't know. I think is
I think this actually came up on the original PR now about it. I was like 2 years ago, so I don't know, I'm still gonna find it.
Hmm. Well, I think we've gotten to the point where we're able to explain why exactly we're seeing all of the things we're seeing. With a little bit of a caveat of confirming that indeed there are kernel modules that don't have a version. But that seems like a definite possibility to explain this.
Yeah.
But I don't think we've reached a conclusion in, like, what do we do in that case? it seems weird to say like use the version if it exists, and if it doesn't, use the kernel, the vermagic. Um,
I agree. It seems like the kernel version, I think we've come to the conclusion on this search that the kernel version is not the same thing as the module version. And
for
and
sure.
we're including that information in the metadata today.
Yeah, but the strange question
Yeah.
is like, does anyone care what the actual version of the module is, or do they actually care from an SBOM
I,
perspective of what kernel it's against?
I, hmm. I wonder if we could find a CVE against a kernel module and see what version is reported there. Because
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's one use case is a vulnerability scan. But I think the problem is, let's imagine that this like canraw.co is built at version 4 against this ARM7 kernel. And then they fix a bug in it, and then they build the version 4.1 against this ARM7 kernel. Like, those are two different versions of the kernel module. They're going to have exactly the same vermagic string because they're meant to be used with exactly the same kernel. And so I think in terms of like identifying the software, we kind of have to try to use the version if it's available.
Yeah, to me it's just distinct. So I mean, I also kind of wonder if using the word like unknown is putting a monkey wrench in here, because if there isn't a bug, it isn't unknown. It has no version, and that's a different assertion.
Well, I mean, it might have a version. Like what we're really saying is that like whoever compiled this thing did not put the version item in the ELF metadata that we're reading. Which, so from Syft's perspective, the version is unknown. I think that's when I think Syft is kind of being right there, because we said like we're sure we found a Linux kernel module, right? It's that kind of file,
Yeah.
and it doesn't identify itself so by version. So
As far as I can tell, from a cursory look at a few different examples of kernel module CVEs, the only CPEs being written are against the kernel itself, and sometimes distributions like Fedora, Debian, etc. That like no one's going to the extent of, even though there's a Broadcom
interesting.
driver, SPU driver CVE, they're saying, oh, it really affects these kernels, which is of course what everyone cares about.
Yeah.
But no one's
Interesting.
going to the extent to even write the CPE for that, because I guess
Can
nobody is bothering with versions of the
can
module.
Yeah,
can
except for probably
you
graphics drivers, right? Because like those things, it's the pattern of you have a bunch of different kernels, and then you grab a third party driver, because it's not like maintained as part of the kernel source itself. Like a lot of kernel modules are just in the kernel, they come with the kernel. And so for those, I would imagine, yeah, it's kind of linked to the version of the kernel that it came with. But there are a lot of like third-party drivers, like NVIDIA drivers or whatever. They don't come with the kernel, so their actual versions matter.
I think I have examples here. Please correct me if I've gotten something wrong, but
yeah, these are all what do you do to get the JSON on? I feel like I can never remember how to get the JSON on the CVE page.
you mean like the specific CPEs?
Yeah, I want to see the CPE graph JSON object.
I think that's what Dan's showing on his screen. It's not JSON, but it is like
I don't.
Maybe that's not what you're talking about.
No, I want to look at the JSON because the web view is I feel like it's simplified, or it can simplify the tree structure. Oh,
Yeah, you have to hit the API, I'm pretty sure, to get the JSON. I don't think you get it through here.
Just a second. You can do it in the browser. That's what I was hoping. I just want to see if they're like, because those are all like -o CVEs. And so it might be saying like, when run on this kernel, and then the web UI is just bad at that. Nope.
I mean, they usually show like the node configuration, like it is usually
Yeah.
fully represented in that bottom table, even if you have to click through a few things like what Dan was doing. Yeah, I mean okay, so I mean it looks like a cursory look at from an MVB perspective, like nobody writes CVEs against like kernel module versions. So, and that kind of pairs with our previous knowledge of, well, kernel modules tend not to have versions. So like it seems to be reinforcing.
Well, what would you all think about a Syft config that like makes the, I guess it could also be a default behavior change, but what would you think about making Syft surface the version part of the ver magic string as the kernel module version?
Yeah, it does seem, there is a good argument for it. There's a couple of arguments against it, but they seem weak.
Well, I guess
I mean, go ahead, Keith.
I've got another question. Is there a case that we would not surface the Linux kernel itself? Right?
Oh, meaning like the other cataloger?
Yeah. Like we would have a module that like potentially is part of the Linux kernel at the Linux kernel version that the Vermagic has. But I'm sorry, maybe this is what you're saying, Will, and I just misunderstood. But like
Yeah.
the Linux kernel CPE with that Linux kernel Vermagic string seems like the thing that's important in order to match vulnerabilities.
Right.
So,
And I'm really frustrated with the CPEs on this CVE because like the description says, if you have these particular Ethernet drivers installed via kernel module on these particular versions of the kernel, you have a use after free vulnerability. But then the CPEs just say, are you on this version of the Linux kernel? And like, what if you're on this version of the Linux kernel and you're like, you don't have an Ethernet driver, or you have a different Ethernet driver, or you compiled yourself a patch, like, right? It's just like the kernel, right? It doesn't say anything, but the description is about a kernel module, not the kernel. And I don't have a good sense of like what the distros are doing. Like, I think another place that would make sense to hang the vulnerability off of is like a distro version, and to just say like this build of, Fedora has these kernel modules or something. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, because those CPEs just say I'm running Linux.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
It's thorny, Will, I think, because you don't have to compile this code as a module. Like it can be just in your kernel statically.
Oh, okay. Yeah. See, that's okay. So I don't know enough about like, I don't think I know enough about Linux kernel modules.
sounds like we've got to bring this up with Linus.
It's triggering something. There was a discussion from the kernel team about the kernel CVEs and basically saying like, you have to treat them differently, right? They are what they are. Doing the same kind of assessments for all of them because they're generated, I think, at a very granular level, and there's a ton of them, is creating a lot of kind of noise. I don't think it's about module versus statically compiled versus versions of modules versus versions of kernels, but it does seem to me like there's a discussion happening about whether or not this is a special category of vulnerabilities that has to be treated in a special way. Although for us, I'm still trying to figure out like, I'm not sure we've reached a conclusion in terms of like it's another one of these roll-up scenarios like severity. We have one version field, but these things actually have a few different views about versionness.
Right. That
We have
makes
to,
sense.
we
Like,
have to think about, what we want to roll up to the top, whether to fill it in with the best information we have, or if we make a decision about like which you go with.
Well,
right. Or
I think there's a
go ahead.
canonicalness to it. It's, I don't think we would say like, if there is version, use it. If not, fall back to kernel version, because
I agree.
you wouldn't, yeah, like I think we would want to say like one's canonically correct over the other and then use it. And Will, your suggestion right now is, should we swap it? So we're like the kernel version is the canonically correct version for the module.
I think my concern is like, let's say I own the Ethernet whatever driver. I can't see the package anymore because we're scrolled down, but there's some like Ethernet driver on this, right? The like there's a PCMCIA Ethernet driver thing, right? So let's say I'm the vendor for that, and I'm like, oh, am I looking? I'm looking at a different. Sorry, I clicked on a different one than you all. Let me look at see if that's right. See, this is in the Linux kernel. I think that's different. The first kernel module link Alex showed, the 2023-1670, that one is like, I think this is sorry. I was complaining about the wrong CPEs, but I think the point stands. So
Yeah.
this is a vulnerability in a driver,
Yeah.
but it
It's
is
the same.
recorded as just saying, like somebody correctly parsing these CPEs would just say, you're running kernel 374, so you have this vulnerability. And that's really frustrating because there's no reason to suppose that you have this like PCMCIA Ethernet card installed or its drivers installed. And I think, and if I was selling those drivers, like if I was selling this PCMCIA slot and I became aware of this thing and became aware of the CVE, I would fix my drivers and recompile them for all the kernel versions, and then that would be undetectable if we're using the kernel version as the package version. I think that's actually I don't know if maybe it's true that nobody does that, but it feels like that, it's like we wouldn't say that the version of a like executable that makes syscalls on Linux is the kernel ABI it expects to call. I mean, on some level, that's an important version to know. You can't go below that and expect to run that executable, but like the software versions independently. And that's like kind of invisible in these CPEs. So I am unsatisfied with both versions, but I don't know enough about it. Maybe somebody from the community is like a kernel module developer and will tell us we're all wrong. That would be very helpful.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'll drop this one. This one went a little sideways for me. So here's an NVIDIA one. This one's probably a better example. I believe they are talking about NVIDIA, kernel module. I think I'm going to put a big asterisk around that one. But here we got a CPE written against the NVIDIA container toolkit, another one written against the kernel.
But
well, no, but they're both running on the kernel, right?
But I don't know that the NVIDIA container toolkit is.
It's a library.
Yeah. And so, right. And it has the CPEs of like this library on this kernel version, which makes sense like that. And actually it's not even saying the kernel version, it's just saying the platform. But like that makes more sense. I think. Yeah. And I guess.
Oh yeah, you're right. you're right. That's a platform CPE there. I did miss that.
Right. And I was expecting like 2023 1670, which is the like third party driver issue. Um,
Yeah.
I was expecting that to have platform CPEs for the affected kernel versions, and then an application CVE for the module that is driving the Ethernet packets that has the flaw in it. But that's not what it says. And so they're
Right.
just saying, if you're running kernel 516, you're vulnerable to this. It's like, no, but like I don't even have a PCMCIA slot, much less a kernel module that's giving me an Ethernet card driver for it.
Well,
Correct me if I'm wrong, but like that is bundled into a monolithic kernel potentially.
well, or it's bundled into a directory of kernel modules that got shipped.
Right. And I think
One of
that's
the two.
the confusing thing is Syft. Like if Syft is finding kernel modules, it's often finding like these .ko files on disk and saying like this file is a compiled Linux kernel module. And I don't think the kernel ABI it's meant to work with, or the kernel version it's meant to work with, is really the version of the software, even though it's what people talk about. I don't know.
But at the same time, we also don't make that distinction with, say, like, so if I scan a Linux system, we don't make the distinction of like systemctl enable versus disable for services. Like if you have the software present, you could be vulnerable. We don't say like, well, it never starts at boot. That's really up to like the end user to figure out.
I don't follow that analogy at all. What I'm saying is like the kernel modules are separate software from the kernel,
Yep.
and they version separately from the kernel. And the like VerMagic is more like a compiler target than a software version.
Agreed.
And so I don't know about maybe so I don't know about surfacing it in that way. That doesn't.
Well, this goes back to my original question, like, are we going to surface the Linux kernel module CPE with that version somewhere? Right? I feel like it's almost like we might want to surface two separate packages here. One, which is the module, and one is the Linux kernel that we identified that we think it's a part of. I'm guessing we're surfacing that from some other means, but if we're
Yes.
not, it seems like maybe we
Yeah.
should
There's
make sure we do.
No, you're right. There's a sister cataloger. It looks for the VM Linux archives, which is like the compressed kernel and then the uncompressed kernel too. So like it looks for like 5 different patterns of like the kernel binary essentially. And that's using VerMagic to like look up the right version, and which would match the VerMagic on the kernel modules in theory, at least the prefix. So yeah, like that on a typical system would be caught. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think, yeah.
So
I
if
kind of
that's the
want to
case,
relate the. Go ahead, Keith. Sorry.
if that's the case, then I think we're doing the right thing,
Yeah.
right? Because we're informing the person they have the Linux version, Linux kernel version, and we're informing them that they have these modules installed, and we don't have the version information for the modules, and that seems like we're doing the right thing to me.
Yeah. And on
Right.
top of that, we've already looked at like several examples of CVEs where like even if we like decided to put any kind of version onto these kernel modules, we're never going to match it because it's only going to be matched against the kernel, which is key to your point. So I think this issue should be closed. We should say this is doing the right thing. VerMagic is for something else, the kernel, and that's not the identity of the package. And that's that.
Yep, that's what I think too.
Yeah.
I'll type it up.
But also, include like what's like, because it doesn't look like in the ticket, there's been like looking at the Syft output, at least since 2024. So I think it might help to show that metadata that we showed before, saying like the information is in there, like, and this makes it clear, you can see it for the kernel module cataloger, you got the ver magic, you got the kernel version, but the version of the module itself is actually a distinct field. That's why it's showing as unknown for this particular module. If it was set, it would be there.
Yeah.
Right. I'll try
Anyone,
to,
anyone want to take that one?
yeah, I'll try to remember all those details.
And
Cool.
also, whoever's, it sounds like Keith, so you're taking it. We have to remember to take up the needs discussion from these as we do the replies too. So.
Done.
Yay. 40 minutes in, we got through one issue.
No, good one though. Yeah, for sure. Okay, well let's see if we can tackle another one. Let's see. We've got one PR to look at. You guys want to hop over to that one?
Yeah. What is it?
Oh, this is a good one to have Alex back for.
Oh, right. I think I dropped off the cliff when right when this was happening. Okay. So this is unrelated,
Oh, yeah.
correct me if I'm wrong, to all things container D. Just so happens to have Sebastian on here too.
Yes. I
Okay.
believe the gist of this is that the original what the original client, I think it was Docker client, is now Moby client. The repo even redirects to this Moby client, and so we should probably just update to what the current thing is.
You know what's funny though? I mean, it's been like that for years. So I'm actually really surprised that Stereoscope had this to begin with. I mean, when did they did the rename? Well, like 7 years ago? I can't remember. I might be
A
misremembering
long
this.
time ago. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, because it was shortly thereafter they did the repo rename, which like went okay. Like, you know, the GitHub redirect was in place.
Right.
But I mean, I remember if you tried to use, I think this was back. Yeah, I think like back, I think it was trying to get Dive to like use the new client, and like Go wouldn't quite do it. Like there's some dependencies where that wouldn't quite work. So we had to like stay on the old one for a while. I mean, this was a long time ago. So um, yeah, we should definitely do this. Let me read through the conversation here. Doesn't appear to be anything breaking per se. Yeah, I mean, I think this is let's merge it. Oh, and it looks like they have some different options for, like the API is not a one-for-one. I mean, it was swapped out some. That's like hmm.
Mm.
Yeah, but I mean, this looks good. Okay, actually, I will approve. Maybe we can merge it live. Be fun. Anybody have any? Oh, it's got to get rebased. Okay, I'll go do that now. Anybody have any comments on this one
Nope.
or questions?
Yeah, this one looked like a yes, we should do it to me. So
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
And
I'm gonna go
would it-
rebase it.
Would it just be in Stereoscope, or are there other places throughout our tooling ecosystem that are directly interacting with Docker? I don't know if there would be, but
The only other thing I can think of is we have some test utilities that might be doing that. So like we might have to go and update that library, which hasn't been touched in a very long time. I think that's it, because Stereoscope is like the choke point for all things talking with like container runtimes entirely. Like, this is where we talk with containerd directly, or Docker via the socket, or you know, Podman, etc. PR 500, nice and even.
I mean, this is an interesting comment, right? That it'll drop support for EOL versions of Docker. So that's the only other friction I could think of from a user perspective. If anyone's got a very old Docker,
I think so. There's already some incompatibility, like it's going through some very old test cases, like in Yardstick and stuff. And if you pull down like super old Grype today, it's like too old to talk to a modern Docker daemon. Um, but I guess maybe this compatibility is the other way. Um, but
cool.
yeah,
I was just going to see how old Docker 20 v25 is.
Yeah, what version are we on now? Nowadays.
V25 isn't that old. January 2024, it's 2 years old. That is something to, let's keep an eye on that.
So
Because if there's like a distro that's got a version of Docker that is, then the distro is not EOL, and they're supporting a Docker less than 25, that might matter.
In terms of like Stereoscope and Syft, we would theoretically just fall back to the registry client at that point, I think, right?
we would, which goes through GDCR. It would still, I mean, yeah, so it wouldn't like break a CLI user per se, but
Unless
that
they
would,
were trying to scan a locally built.
right, right. It's still going to be surprising in the best of cases, right? And you're right, still breaking the worst of cases.
I'm sorry, Dan, what was the date you said for the Docker 25?
Some indication that it was January 2024.
I think it's probably worth going forward with.
Yeah, like Ubuntu 2404 has Docker 28, version 28, so that's good. I'm just looking at just an example of a distro that maintained its own version of Docker from around that time. It's probably good, yeah.
I mean, at worst case scenario, users would have a workaround of just doing a Docker save locally, I think, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think through what API users would like, what their workaround could be. Because they couldn't do a go mod replace because there are actual API changes that it wouldn't compile. Or go mod edit replace. I think they would have to fork and go back.
yeah, at
Or
least for automatic version negotiation. Is that what you're
yeah,
getting at?
We should make sure to add that to some documentation somewhere.
Well, it is rebased. Let test pass. I don't know. I'm still on team keep going forward. So
Yeah, I think especially because like there are versions of Grype that are on DB schema v6, and the old Docker. So there's not right. So there's like someone can keep using their old Docker and the current Grype for a long time.
all right. Well, in that case, let's move forward. I'll get this merged hopefully right now, maybe before you leave the call.
You can probably move the needs discussion too. I think we discussed it.
Awesome. Done.
And sorry, I do that, but I'm not signed in right now, so I can't. Sorry.
No, it's all good.
All right. Well, we got about 9 minutes left. You guys want to try to tackle another issue that's got needs discussion? One more?
Yep, let's do it.
All right. So it looks like we have 2 candidates. Depths for GitHub Actions, CVE publish date field available in the report.
No preference here.
Let's look at the GitHub
Coin
action.
flippage. So this doesn't. So this, I don't think we can do this. Like statically, like Syft is not going to have access to this information. We'd have to
Right.
go online, go get stuff, and then do further analysis.
Yep.
Because we only have the workflow files, we have the action YAML files. But yeah, we don't, beyond that, in those repos, there's either node modules directory or a dist directory that has, I guess it's a dist directory. Was that?
I think it would be, download the repo or similar and look at the package JSON. Maybe the dist directory is going to be, generally speaking, a compiled like webpack type bundle, right?
Yeah.
Or I guess
So-
like switch to ES build.
Is that what they mean, or do they mean like our action uses steps? Like,
I think, yeah, I think there might have been a talk of the composite actions. But I think they're, yeah, both would be like potentially different. Let's see.
I think it's interesting that there's this comment here. We have to download the release archive of the GitHub action and then run Syft on that to get some visibility, because that'll have the depths in it, I guess.
Yeah, I think they're talking about like, NPM depths is what they're.
right.
What
And
were
that
you guys
would-
talking about? I don't want to lose that thread.
So I think we were thinking about in compound action, you can say like uses actions checkout, uses, Peter Evans
Actually,
create pull request.
I think that
That one probably works today.
works.
They would both work if we had the source code, right?
Cool. Yeah, what I mean is like we look at workflows, we look at actions, we look at actions with uses statements, but what we don't do is we don't go grab any nested workflows, we don't grab any source code of actions. We don't. I'm actually trying to remember what we do for stuff like an action that is a Docker container. There's so few of those, but
Well, in all of the cases, we read the
Nothing.
files and we report back what we find from the files, but we don't go and fetch anything.
Agreed with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just trying to remember if we are even smart enough to say like, this is a Docker type, and I don't think we are. Like, I think it's what you're saying. We have static files. We say what the line says. We don't try to interpret the line or fetch anything beyond that. Where the line is like uses blah.
Right. And I mean,
But
we
the-
do have stuff that we fetch things online from, like Maven. You know, we could. I'm like 100% for adding some sort of, disabled by default enhancing to go fetch things. I think the biggest concern that I see with this is GitHub rate limiting, because that tends to happen fairly quickly.
Yep. I
Yeah.
also kind of wonder if there isn't a discussion we can have here with the user about a more appropriate place being in the SBOM action itself, right? Because it's a little closer to where this stuff is actually present. I know it's not the same, like, the request is I've checked out a source code repository, I'm generating an SBOM. I would like to see the dependencies of the actions that this would pull in when executed in actions. I think that's the core ask. But I kind of wonder if there isn't another approach to say, like, well, another way to make an SBOM for this application is actually in the action flow itself. And I'm wondering if that might be more comprehensive, because then you're going to have what's actually there.
I mean, it will because I was just thinking about this other thread that I think what you just said answers it. So like, for instance, let's just say I wanted to, I have UV, and so I'm using like the Astral UV action to get UV installed. Well, there's a little, if I happen to know how to parse that action, and I know that this special version variable means what the version of UV is going to be, then I can piece all that together. Syft is going to know that for like the n many possible like actions that install things like that. But if UV is installed, odds are we can get the version from that. I'll put asterisk on that one. I don't make any claims of we can even pull the version from UV, but it's something that we're used to doing, as opposed to like supporting in many possible flavors of how GitHub Actions can support, like saying I'm going to install this version of thing, and they could put things like latest. So it's really more like it's a manifest, a desire of what I want the version to be. It's a loose requirement. It's not necessarily a pinned version. So yeah, having the I scan the actions environment is probably going to be better. Where do the actions go on the runner? like what? I don't know the answer to that question.
I think they're in some sort of temp directory, if memory serves, but I'm sure we could figure that part out. But this is also like going back to kind of not scanning outside of a scan target by default too, generally speaking.
Yeah, I'm wondering. So like Dan, you had said something a while back, like, is this a scan action? Like, so sorry, is this our SBOM action?
Well,
that could
I'm
orchestrate
saying,
this.
Could there be a solution for what the user is trying to do in that flow rather than in this flow? Rather than the checkout source code, try to get an SBOM of everything it's going to be after you run it. Instead, actually create the SBOM in the place where it's running, where you actually have the material.
Right. I think it's also really, that maybe we could do that. When you first said that, I thought you meant like we should encourage GitHub Actions authors to put SBOMs on their releases. I'm like, that's a good idea too. But yeah, it's interesting because like a GitHub action is basically like, please go download this stuff and run it. And I like, it's not always statically known what that's going to result in, right? I mean, hopefully it's statically known, but we don't know that it's pinned to a SHA. We don't know that they have immutable releases. We don't like, and so, yeah, that's interesting. I'm not sure. Not sure the best way to do this.
We've also had a request to resolve SHAs to version numbers so that we can
Yep.
actually do vuln matching on them. So, I mean, I think there are a number of requests in the same vein to figure this out, but
Well, and that's one of the things I think that like taking a look at Zizmore might be interesting. So Zizmore has a bunch of checks that it only runs if there's a GitHub token in the environment. And it does things like ask the GitHub API and like, hey, does this version comment match this SHA? Like, does this tag match this? Does this like so that's sort of cool. And I just think it's a cool tool. But yeah. It would require a bunch of online stuff that we don't presently have. Or that database. We're always talking about Syft having a database of everything. Because we'd also love to look up jars and just say, like, we took the SHA-1 of a jar, and this is, we know all the SHA-1s of all the jars in Maven Central, and now we can just identify it. We don't have to guess the group ID by like unzipping it and grepping manifests and stuff.
Right.
So maybe it's another one for the Syft data source.
Yeah, or data service. Yeah.
Well, I hate to say it, guys, but we are a bit over time. I think we'll continue to discuss this. I thank you for the conversation on this one and raising it to the surface. I think we talked about some good ideas, maybe not reached a conclusion quite yet, but we'll continue discussing it through the ticket. But for now, I think we'll probably drop off, and thank you all again for joining us. As usual, we'll see you next week, next Thursday. And thanks. I'll drop off for now.
Cheers.
Bye.